All right, what is up, folks? Welcome back to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast. I'm your host, JK, and I'm going to start things off a little bit differently than I normally do. Of course, you are on here now after you've listened to the pre-recorded intro. And instead of going through, a whole bunch of stuff, I'm just going to jump right in with starting with the context for today's episode. So, at the time of both recording and release of this particular episode, it's the last Friday of the month of May, 2025. Although I don't think that what I'm going to share with you is specific to just this particular time frame. I do think that it's something that will be relevant, helpful, impactful, and useful, or some combination of those things throughout the rest of your life when it comes to examining what you have the capacity to do when. I find this to be most helpful, and this is my context. As I'm going through this particular process right now, it's not something that takes a super long time to do. It's something that I've spent, I'd say, an average of, I don't know, let's say about 10 or so minutes a day over the past week or so, just jotting down some different things as I prepare for the month of June coming up. So again, my context here is that this is something that I've recently worked through, and I want to pass it on to you because based on the folks that I work with, also just my own personal experience, and then also some recent feedback that I've received when I've passed this on to some other people who are not clients of mine, they have found it to be helpful. So hopefully you will too. And what I do is spend a few minutes each day, basically like 1 to 2 weeks out from the end of the month, getting an idea of what I believe I'm going to have the ability to handle for the next upcoming month. And it's especially helpful now because we're basically entering the summer season, for lack of a better way to kind of structure it. So the months of June, July, and August are months that for myself and my household are quite a bit different. I've got one, we'll say like school age kid who's going to be entering the 8th grade, plays travel baseball, will periodically play like some kind of pickup type games with a travel basketball team, and then also enrolled in a handful of different sports camps, just kind of spread throughout the summer. We've got a 19-year-old daughter who is here home for the summer, going to be working and doing her thing. There'll obviously be like sub-family activities that'll be interspersed throughout that. And then with that, both my wife and I work full-time and have full-time careers. And so there's a lot to juggle and balance and keep harmony on. If you're somebody who's been a listener of the podcast for quite some time, or somebody who knows me in real life, I very rarely lean too heavy on the balance thing. I tend to talk about it more as harmony, with understanding that some things need to play a louder role, or particular instruments got to be a little bit louder at sometimes just to make things kind of even all out. And so this is something that I spend some time doing, again, near the end of each month, and then going into looking at an overall season with trying to figure out, okay, based on all of the different things that I'm involved in. And I'm involved in quite a few different things. If you are a podcast listener, then you probably primarily are familiar with me with what I do in the fitness industry. So I'm a fitness coach. So I've been doing that for upwards of a little over 10 years now. Then also, I've been in the retail management field for a number of years. I got my first retail manager position when I was 19 years old. So we are coming up on close to 20 something years in the retail industry. So I've been in that game for quite a while. And then also I am a co-founder in Feed Your Habits, the company that sponsors this podcast. So have play a role there. And then also I host this particular podcast. So with all the different things that I have going on, I truly understand, like truly understand what it means when people say I have a busy schedule, or I've just got a lot going on, or whatever, whatever combination of things that they will kind of throw out there. And that tends to kind of be my wheelhouse too, is helping people who just feel like they're pulled in so many different directions and trying to figure out how to quote unquote balance it all. And the spoiler alert is that you don't really try to balance it all. You understand that there are certain things that move at a particular speed during certain times, and then other things that move a bit slower at other times. It's figuring out like when and where to push and when and where to pull. So that's what I want to take a few minutes here and share with you about, share with you a strategy that I use that maybe you can use this exact strategy or pull pieces from it as you think about what your capacity is going to be for either the upcoming month or the upcoming season for you. So something that I think about here is really asking myself just the really big question, and I'm going to use the summertime and the month of June as the example here. However, remember that this is something that can really be relevant at any time. So I start off with just trying to answer the big question of what do I actually believe that I have the capacity for the summer, for this particular time frame, and when will I actually have the capacity to do the things that I want to do. One of the reasons, before getting into basically kind of like a two-lens approach that I look at things through, one of the reasons why this is a bigger topic for me specifically is because the month of June historically is a slower month when it comes to the overall fitness space, the coaching industry. It is a time where you're got folks that are starting to wrap up like the busiest part of their year when it comes to parents for the most part, especially if you've got parents of like younger school age kids and things like that. You're wrapping some things up. You haven't quite like hit like the full out travel period that tends to be a little bit later, like mid to later in the summer. However, you're transitioning from a very, very structured time into things that are a bit more flexible. We've got a lot of different things going on and people pulled in different directions. Kids don't have as much structure unless you specifically have them enrolled in something that has them still going to like a camp or something like that, structured times of the day. But more often than not, with the folks that I'm primarily working with, the ones who do have kids, they are this is a tougher time frame for them. And so a lot of times newer people or people are not looking to necessarily start a new fitness routine or a new fitness rhythm over the summer because they just don't feel like it's a great time for them to do it because they just feel like they can't really focus a lot on it. I would actually tend to say that the folks that tend to get into really working on the foundation of their fitness and their health during some of the busier times seem to me, and I've also heard this from others. I know my friend Mike Milner has shared this on his podcast and on some of our coaching calls too. Just this just theory that those who tend to get into programs, especially programs that are all about building foundational habits versus like some total like balls to the wall, you're going to do something completely asinine and restrictive for the next like 3 weeks and hopefully you make it. Those programs that tend to really focus on building foundational habits and sustainability the folks that get into those tend to do pretty well because they're actually starting at a time where they don't really have the ability to try and be perfect. So contrary to popular belief, sometimes the busiest time and the craziest time can be the most opportune time to start because you don't have a whole lot of time to play around and just kind of go off course. So anyways, so let's get into what I want to share with you with basically like a two-lens approach that I take to figuring out capacity. And I can't take credit for this first thing. So first thing that I do is I think about what do I actually have the capacity to do? So I think about what do I have the capacity to do? And then when do I have the capacity to do it? So first, starting with what do I have the capacity to do? I previously read a book a while back called, I think it's called The Power of Full Performance. And the subtitle or subheading of the book is about learning how to manage energy, not time. And one of the concepts in that book that I've shared in one of the previous episodes here and often share with some of my more like what we'll call type A, try to get a lot of stuff done clients is this concept of, I can't remember the exact verbiage, but I basically call the concept of like the ceiling and the floor when you think about the amount of output that you're putting into a particular task. So if we think in terms of something like working out, so let's use something like that. So the upper edge or the ceiling, the upper end of working out for me would be 6 days out of a week on average. So on average, the absolute like upper end that I can handle is 6 days per week. Now, when I'm calling that the ceiling and the upper end, I'm talking about that is the max that I can do, understanding that it's a time that requires deep recovery. It requires a good amount of time for me to be able to recover from that. So that's basically like living on the edge. It's doable, but it's not doable for a super long time because it's something that does require a good amount of recovery. So I can work out if I really, really wanted to, and I've done this periodically before. I can work out 6 days, work out pretty intensely for those 6 days because I know that I have the ability, like if I'm going to work out in the morning, I know that the rest of my day is pretty low impact, pretty low stress. It's something that I'm going to be able to pretty much easily recover from. So I know that that is my upper end. That's my ceiling. Now, then on the opposite side, you also find your floor. My floor is my just absolute baseline minimum. Some people are really uncomfortable calling it the minimum or the minimum effective dose. So I will refer to it as being like the check the box, the baseline, just the absolute, like this is the floor of what I can get done. And for me, and I haven't really hit that floor in quite a while, I would say for me, that would be like 3 days a week. So 3 days a week, if I get in 3 workouts in a particular week, then for me, that's pretty much like my floor. I am able to both mentally and physically check the box of I got the work done. Now, did I get to the total upper edge? No. However, I got in enough for me to maintain what I believe I need in order to keep the results that I've gotten or keep the ball rolling, like keep the ball rolling down the field. I don't think that quite works, but keep the car rolling down the highway. How about that? I keep the car rolling down the highway. It's repeatable. It requires just enough energy to get the job done. So that's my floor, and then there's my ceiling. So I think about that when I think about working out, when I think about what I've got going on as far as like in my coaching business, what I've got the capacity to handle. I think about that when it comes to working with my clients. So within the coaching work that I do, there's working with clients, and then there's also working on the business itself. So we call it like working in the business and working on the business. So working in the business is me doing client work, client check-ins, building programs. A lot of the time that I spend is sitting at this very same desk that I'm recording this podcast on, and working on programs, finding demos, all that good stuff, reworking, making tweaks, anything we need to do there. And then working on the business would be things like back end stuff, trying to work on at some point finally getting a website up and running, working on structure and back end stuff. I still am, dealing with like handling payment systems and all that jazz. And then also building resources, and just, I'm about to have PTSD. I just this afternoon spent like a couple of hours working on a particular resource that's going to be coming out later, that's going to be released to my email list, like a sleep guide. So those are different things that are going on. Also with that though, don't forget, I started off by sharing a handful of things that I'm involved in. And first and foremost, like I'm a father and I'm a husband. So there are upper ends and floors to that too. There's a ceiling and a floor to pretty much everything that you've got going on. So again, I think about what do I have the capacity to do, being, okay, there's the upper end of what I can do, which I can do that, but I can't do it for long because it's going to take me a decent amount of time to recover. And then there's the floor. I can do that all day, every day. And also, I do understand, and I know there's other folks who are listening to this who can relate, that that's not going to keep me satisfied for super long. At some point, I'm going to hit this mental point where I'm like, listen, you've been doing like the floor for quite a while and you have the ability to do more. So it's okay to push it in some of these different aspects at times. So hopefully that makes sense as far as like part one of this two lens approach. The second part of that lens is then figuring out when I have the capacity to do those things. So again, there's the what I have the capacity to do, and then there's the when do I have the capacity to do it. And for this particular one, I've actually taken some inspiration from my friend Kelly. So for those of you who may be familiar with Kelly Lutz, she is my friend and co-host for the Lifting, Running, and Living podcast with Kelly and JK. So yes, I'm on that particular podcast too. And a couple of things that she has talked about has been when she is coaching an athlete and laying out their plan to get them up and ready and trained for like a marathon, an ultra, a half, whatever, whatever endurance challenge they're taking on. There are times when they're going to have to do like these longer, harder runs. And I was asking her at some point, because I'm not I'm not a run coach to begin with. So saying I'm not an experienced run coach, the experience part can just be left out. I'm just not a run coach. I can certainly train somebody overall to build their capacity and things like that. But when it comes to understanding how much mileage someone needs in order to prep for a marathon and beyond, that is definitely not my bag. And that is also why I collaborate with really, really smart people like Kelly and others. So anyways, one of the things that she was sharing with me when we were talking on the podcast was talking about how, the majority of the people, based on their schedule, they usually have more space in their schedule over the weekend. And she even herself was talking about when she does her long runs, they're typically on weekends because they have more time to do that. So I think about capacity very much the same way. You schedule your longest tasks, you schedule your hardest tasks when you have the ability to actually do them. So thinking about capacity, when do you have the capacity to actually do that thing at the ceiling version of it? So you do your long runs, or in terms of, for myself, you do your hardest workouts or your longest workouts when you truly have the time to do them. And that might sound like a no-brainer. However, as my grandfather used to say, I maybe somebody out there can relate. I have for sure been that person who's like, yeah, this workout that usually takes an hour and a half, eh, I have exactly 1 hour and 35 minutes to do this workout, so I'm not going to make any adjustments. I'll be totally fine. Now, I have since evolved and matured quite a bit from that many years ago to thinking like, well, if the workout has, this much going on, it doesn't matter if my day is more packed. I'm still going to do the full version of that workout on that particular day. And I've, again, grown and matured and educated myself quite a bit to realize that that's not necessarily the way to go. So the mistake is that Kelly was talking to me about is also sometimes treating those easy days. So the easy runs, they were treating those like medium to heavy effort still, and that would then lead to burnout. And so I think about the same thing is those days where I've decided that, you know what, today it's just got to be a check the box, hit the goals that are on the floor day, hit the floor level, and still feeling like, well, that's not going to be enough. So making it harder than it really needs to be, that ain't it. Like, that's just not it, because then you run into an issue of time. Something else has to be pushed out of the way. And I just think about how Kelly has talked to me before about, it's very simple. Make your hard runs hard, make your easy runs easy, and you're good to go. And again, the common mistake typically being that both runners and just people in everyday life are kind of feeling like, well, it's just too easy. There's no point in doing that. Yeah, there is a point in doing that because it still works towards building your overall resilience and your overall capacity, whether we're talking running or otherwise. So for myself, my hard days would be days where I am operating at like my full capacity, whether it's family stuff, it's coaching stuff, it's my own workouts, it's retail, or any combination of all of those things. Then my hard days, those are my full capacity days. My easy days are days where I'm working at the minimums. I am handling the stuff on the floor. My workout that normally would be an hour, potentially that's going to swap and be, say, like a 20-minute zone 2 cardio day. It may be a walk day. It may be a shortened version where normally I'm doing, say, like 5 to 6 movements in the workout. I may do the 2 main movements and then call it a day after that. And those days may be more often than not for a while for this upcoming season. That just may be the way that it is. So the deal, or the way that I do it, is the hard days, I have fewer of them, but they're more intense. So I basically, let's say over a 7-day period, like this upcoming month, for the month of June, I'm already looking at, there are particular days where there are going to be days that probably start at like 4 o'clock in the morning and finish up around 10 o'clock at night. Those days are going to be hard days. That will probably be about 2 days out of the week. The other days will have not, they won't be stretched quite as much. So those 2 days will be, it's good 2 to 3, but for the most part, probably 2 days are going to be like the really, really hard days. And then the other days, those are the days where I'm okay simply checking off my box to say, got the floor done in that one, got the floor done in that one. And then Lord willing, we live to see another day. So again, those hard days, they become longer and more intense, but they're less frequent because I'm more focused on, okay, keep the hard days hard, keep the easy days easy. So just understanding when and where I have the capacity to do those particular things. So hopefully this is all making sense somewhat. I want to also just share with you as I'm kind of wrapping things up, because I do want to leave you with some actionable things that you can do, is take the time, and this doesn't have to take you a really long time. However, recommend take the time to actually map this out, color block I use like Google Calendar. That's been really helpful for me, using something like Google Calendar where you actually have like blocks of time so that it's not just something that you list a whole lot of things that you want to do. It's more you are getting a visual that shows, okay, that square, so that, 5 a.m. to 7 a.m., that is blocked off. You can't just keep stacking stuff inside of that 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. That's where I think time blocking, I was going to say color blocking, but it's kind of a combination of the two. But time blocking and using actual blocks on a visual, like either writing it in a planner or something like that, but something that shades in those boxes, I think can be super helpful if you are someone, again, like me, who sometimes will tend to look at things and just figure, I can just stack a whole lot inside of that. That's where sometimes task lists can be not as helpful as time blocking. So I typically will start with time blocking, and then the task list is something where when I'm in that block, I look over to, okay, this is my coaching work block. So let me go look over at the list that's there and see what I've got going on, and I'll work within that particular block. There's a visual. I'm hopeful that at some point, either somebody will be able to create this visual for me or I will figure out how to create it, maybe with AI or something like that. But I'll leave you with this and then a couple of actionable tips here. If you are someone who just constantly feels like you can just stack on more and more and more, I want you to think about it like some advice that I was given quite a while ago. This is like a number of years ago, where someone was talking to me and they were saying, the way that I had to finally look at it is that you only have so many burners that are on the stove. And the way that they communicated it to me is, let's say that you have 5 or 4 burners on the stove. So at the top of the stove, you've got 4 burners. You can only fit what fits on those 4 burners on the stove. And something that I was trying to share with them is totally get where you're coming from. And for many people, that can be really helpful. For others and for myself at that particular time, the way that I looked at it is, yeah, I totally hear you when you say you can only put 1 pot on each burner of the stove. But the way that I'm looking at it is I'm trying to figure out how can I stack 2 pots on top of each burner. And I would love to have some sort of a visual that would show what it looks like when you try to stack more pots on top of each of the burners, because legit, there was a good portion of time where that's how I looked at capacity, thinking that, yeah, you tell me that there's only 4 burners on the stove, but you're not seeing that these pots or pans are actually stackable. So I think I can probably get this thing done. And then what would happen is I would maybe, nah, not really. I was going to say I'd maybe get everything done. However, the quality of that work was not good at all. So basically, it was kind of like average, which to the person on the other side may have seemed like pretty decent, but being very transparent, and this has been a big growth opportunity over a number of years now, I was realizing that the quality of that particular work wasn't anywhere near as good as it could be. And that's without even putting some sort of like expectation of perfection on it. So it definitely wasn't anywhere near as good as it could be, because I was stacking those pots on top of the burner that was already taken. So if you think about it, the one on the bottom gets a good amount of heat, but the pots that you're stacking on top of it, because you just refuse to understand that you can only fit 1 pot on each burner, then that gets less and less heat. So I just totally took a left-hand turn because I still have this vision of somebody creating that visual for me. So, all right, to close things out, I want you to ask yourself just a few questions here. So first, ask yourself, what do I actually have the capacity for right now? So that's the overall where you start things off. So ask yourself, what do I have the capacity for right now? Then, as you are thinking through the overall, just the different areas that you are responsible for, if you're a parent, if you are a partner, if you are a employee, if you're a business owner, if you are the person who is responsible for the most part for running the household, if you handle the finances, like whatever it may be, if you are in a particular organization, if you volunteer, if you're the coach for one of your kids' teams, if you're a parent who's involved who basically might as well be a coach, like all of those different things, jot down all those different things that you have going on. In each of those things, identify for yourself very simply what allows me to say, I checked the box. I at least like check the box this week for that particular thing. And then what is the absolute like max thing? Like they need somebody to run the concession stands at your kids' gymnastics meet. So you signed up to run the concession stand. You can, like your ceiling is that you can run it all 5 meets for that week, or you can run it for the entire like open to close of the tournament, whatever the case may be. Like that's your max, and you understand that that's your max, which means you're actually going to need a maximum amount of time to recover from that too. So identify your floor, and then identify your ceiling, and then understand, okay, when am I going to be able to do the upper end? And more often than not, if you're anything like me, you won't be able to do it very often. However, that is okay because you're building in plenty of time to be able to recover from that. So again, remember my example of my floor, my example is, hey, there are 2, possibly 3 days that I just know are going to be like it's going to be dark when I get up and it's going to be dark when I go to bed. And just understanding that that's what it's going to be for those 2 days, most likely. And just really focus, make sure that everything gets done on that particular day, stay really focused. And then the other days, it's not like I'm like just kind of lackadaisical. I just am keeping the expectations more at the floor, understanding that that's what I have the capacity to do on those particular days so that I can recover. So it's not really about trying to do less. It's about doing what makes sense for that particular season. That's really the whole point to this. I'm not here trying to convince you that you need to do, you need to be less productive. It's a matter of understanding when and where to place the intensity of that productivity. So think back to the example that I used from Kelly, like make your hard runs hard and keep your easy runs easy. Schedule your long stuff on the days that you know you actually have the capacity to do that, and then be cool with your easy stuff or your recharge days on the other one. All right. So last and certainly not least, if you want any sort of help with perhaps like working through this sort of a thing as it specifically relates to your overall fitness. So I lead with fitness and then work on the basics of sleep, nutrition, and recovery along the way. I do have spots on my one-on-one roster, so you can certainly reach me on Instagram at Coach JK McLeod. You can contact me through my email, which will be in the show notes. At the very least, even if you're not necessarily interested in working with me one-on-one, I strongly recommend that you sign up for my weekly email list. That is something that, based on what I really want to pour a lot of intention and effort into over the summer and going forward. If you are not on my email list, you're going to be missing out on some really good stuff, including not only a free workout each week. I'm starting to also include a couple of freebies, or I'm developing a couple of freebies that are going to be given out specifically only to people who are on my email list very shortly, and then any of my clients, of course, too. So the link to join that is in the show notes. So with that, thank you for listening to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast. And the Help Me Understand podcast is sponsored by Feed Your Habits. FeedYourHabits.com is where you can find casual gym style apparel for those that believe that habits just don't grow on their own, they get fed. If you go to FeedYourHabits.com and you put in my discount code, it's in all caps, JKFYH, that will get you 10% off and free shipping inside of the United States. So thank you again for listening to listening to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time.